Wow, thanks for coming to our seminar. I wonder if the numbers represent the desire for spiritual parenting. I wonder how many of you would say, like, if you're willing to raise a hand just to say, like, I feel like I have been spiritually parented in some way, shape, or form. Could show of hands. Like, okay, that's a lot. So why are you here? You've been, so if you feel like, hey, I haven't really, and I really would desire that, would you be bold enough to raise your hand in that way? Yeah. Yeah, I think it is a both and. I think that's how life works, is that you run in seasons, and other seasons there feels like things are missing, and so, but I think it's a huge gift and a huge importance to the church to prioritize what it looks like to have spiritual parenting. It's been a huge gift in our life to have John and Linda run with us, often at a distance, but with a lot of, like, a phone call away from all the encouragement and strategy and help we have needed along the way. And I think every generation probably says the same thing, that they're concerned about the next generation coming through. I know, like, I remember that growing up, they would look at us and go like, oh. And I feel like we're kind of doing that with Gen Z a bit, and we shouldn't. But the reason we are at times is because there are some alarming statistics. And it was quoted today, Barna just released their whole State of the Church, their stats, and so everybody's going to quote Barna for a bit here, but they basically just came up with some of the alarming stats about the next generation. One is that a little over 25% of American children are currently growing up in less than a two-parent home. So maybe one parent, maybe no parent homes, which you think, well, 25% doesn't seem huge. Well, we're leading the world in that. And obviously that depends on different proximities as to that number going up significantly. But Mexico is 7%. 7% of kids growing up in less than a 2%. That's pretty good. Canada, I just saw, yeah, there you are, 10%. Wow. Yeah, so you guys, yeah, so you got some room for margin there if you want to. I think the other stats that are concerning is that only 37% of Americans raised in a single parent home would say they had dinner together as a family. So important things that you know, like you kind of, maybe by instinct or maybe by modeling, you gather your family for meals, at least a couple times a week, and 37% of either single parent or non-parent homes would say they ever had a family meal together, compared to 69% of kids who grew up in a two-parent family home. When you look at kids who've grown up in, so Barna would differentiate, like, Christian homes where they actually care about their faith. That's how they worded it. And then sometimes you have nominal Christian homes or not Christian at all. So in Christian homes that care about their faith, you see, like, massive difference in statistics around statements like this. So one statement would be, my life has a purpose. And kids growing up in Christian homes where they feel like they take their faith seriously, they would say 63% of those kids would say, my life has a purpose. They would agree to that statement. But only 34% of kids who grew up in a non-Christian or nominally Christian home would say their life has any purpose at all. 34% of these kids. Same group of people, this statement. I feel deeply cared for by those around me. Just that sense of security that someone cares for me. So Christian homes that take their faith seriously, 63%, and other homes, 31%. That says, I don't even know if anybody cares about me. So one last category before we hear from people who have positive things to say. Generation of leaders. In 2015, 22% said that was true. So go all the way back to 2015, 22% said that was true. In 2022, only 14% would say that's true. That there was any sense of, like, we're going to develop you into a leader. Like a young person would come into the church and say, we've got a plan or a track for you to grow and develop or to be spiritually parented. Let's see. So I think that the reality is that spiritual parenting is powerful. That as people come out of these situations and homes, whether it's single parent, no parent, whatever the situation might be, these statistics, that the church actually has the power and the authority to transform these statistics, because they're not statistics, they're people. And Jesus is in the business of transforming people, transforming hearts, and giving hope and retraining people. And so I think as you look at the next generation coming through and you think of who's the next generation that we're going to have to spiritually parent, it might look overwhelming, actually. You might have people who say, like, I've never even had a family meal before. Like, you're inviting me to your house for a family meal? I don't even know what that is. People who say, like, let's talk about your destiny. Let's talk about your future. Like, no one's ever asked me what my future is. You know, I grew up in a home where people used to ask all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? And kids are growing up now with, like, no one's asking me that question. And so we've got some mountains to climb there, but I do think there's hope in the church, that the church has the ability to see these things transformed in people's life and to give them hope and a purpose and a dream for a future. So Alexis is going to talk a little bit about this truth. Oh, can I just say one thing before I pass it? We were talking about this seminar in our planning day yesterday, and Dylan Neely was talking about a time when, Linda, you gave a word in church, and it was a powerful word, and Dylan came up to you and said, wow, that was a powerful word. And I don't know if you remember what you said back to him, but you said, yeah, you should be giving words like that. And he didn't take it like they took it. He took it like, you're right. Like, you called the man out of him to say, like, you should be responsible for the church too, hearing from God in that way. And so there's power in these moments that happen that draw things out of young people to say, like, oh, like I can be a part of this thing.
It's good. So I just want to address, like, why is it even important for there to be mothers in the church? The couple points. Families that thrive have moms in the mix. Metaphorically, we call, like, the church a family. And like the early Christians were saved and added in to the community of believers, and we belong to Christ, and so we belong to his family. And the most healthy families have moms and dads, brothers and sisters. Some even have grandparents and grandbabies. So 18 years ago, Bo and I and 4 other families helped to plant New Community Church. And there was just one couple with us that could have been seen as parental. And they quickly moved to serve another Confluence church on the East Coast. And I was really aware, as like a young woman and a young mom, that there were statistics that said, if you plan at a certain age, you'll only get people 5 years above you and below you in age. And I really wondered where the moms were going to come from. And if I'm honest, we were parented afar by John and Linda and couples like Tim and Mary Chambers, and there was grace for that. And God grew the church. But it was a far cry from kind of a knowing look from a mom, a hug, you know, rolling up on someone's front steps, and like just them knowing that you needed to like come in and have a cup of tea and like say all the things. And so there was grace for it, but we were aware of what we were missing, because as Confluence churches, we are marked by being multi-generational, and we were like, where is it going to come from? And so it's what we've prayed for and contended for, and we still are contending for it. Second would be that as moms, we fill in the gaps. One way to look at a gap is that it's like a break in a barrier, you know, like a military defense. And when there's a big gap, we're vulnerable. And we're vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy. We're vulnerable to the lies in our own mind, misunderstandings, spiritual, relational. And the church itself, and mothers in particular, have a unique opportunity to help fill in the gaps where there's something missing, kind of like a culture of Titus 2 discipleship from one woman to another. You know, the gaps we have in our faith, relationships, families. I came into a New Frontiers church, Confluence church, and I had not been parented much, and I just saw, like, these people are helping to grow me up, like, not in only the ways of my faith, but, like, stuff I didn't know how to do, that, like, I needed to know how to do as, like, a woman, maturing into a woman, yeah. So those needs were designed to be filled by one another, and the church is a unique place for that to happen. So as a result, we share the gospel and we share our lives with each other. And it seems like for some it's really easy. For others, maybe we're more introverted and we kind of like to be at home and not doing all of that. But I want to read from 1 Thessalonians, where it says, "Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you, because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share not only the gospel of our God, but our lives as well." So we, as moms, I'm the female on the panel here with Linda, so I'm doing mom. We love and nurture in a unique way. And it's hearkening back to, you've had many guides, but not many mothers. And like, I had this visual when I was praying through this, is that, moms come up to the kid, they like lick their thumb and like rub the stuff off their face. And it's like, there's a particular grace for that. And moms can get away with doing and saying some things. Like, you could talk to Dylan Neely in a kind of way that he received, right? There was grace and truth there. And equity. Yeah. God created us differently and on purpose. Females are created with an extra dose of nurture, and we think a lot about the well-being of other people. We just do. People in our care. And we long to see Christ formed in you. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. That's Galatians. The role of parents is to help to launch their children out knowing who they are in Christ, what their purpose and mission is in Christ. And if you have children or you're a parent in any kind of way, this like longing that you have for them, to see them succeed, not even in the worldly ways, but like succeed in like you're doing what God has called you to do. You're running the race, the one that God called you to. And so I think the beauty of like maturing in Christ, being mature women in Christ, is that you realize it isn't all about you. And we have eyes to see what some of the younger women are becoming. And we're secure enough to pause from our own pursuits and help you along with yours or bring you along in ours. I think it's really important. And fourthly, I think we've been taught some things. As we've journeyed along with Christ, he's disciplined us, he's revealed things to us, he's taught us some things, and we want to impart those things. There was a talk about that this morning of just impartation. We want to impart things to one another, any or all of it to you. And what that looks like is like one generation extending its blessing to the next. And we want to impart faith and wisdom for you to go further in life and in godliness and in faith, further than we've gone. And so that would be a multiplication of gifting, hope, faith, and love. And I think when we fail to pass on what one generation has to the next, there's a loss on both sides. And I hand it over to you. Yeah.
Hello. I'm just going to give you some practical pointers if any of you are making notes. But simply to say that spiritual parenting is the model that's been through the Bible, Old and New Testament. You have Elijah and Elisha. You have Paul and Timothy. You have Naomi and Ruth. And you see this relationship where one is imparting to the other and actually receiving from each other. So it's a biblical process. And if our churches are to grow and we're to see the kingdom expanded, we have to take on that mantle of not only receiving parenting, but parenting ourselves. That others might be raised up. Well, maybe it's a glorified word for discipleship, but it's more than that because it's a deep relationship that you develop with. And for that to happen, there has to be, number one, a connection. You have to connect to the person you are pouring your life into, and it begins as a friendship. It's simply expressing an interest in someone, some word of affirmation. Sincere, of course, sincere affirmation can draw people to you, really. Having a coffee together, just a time of investing in each other's lives, asking them about their own life, letting them kind of open up and know that you actually are lovingly interested in their life. It's not even about an age difference. And when we think about parenting, we think about older to younger. Of course, that is a fact, but it's actually more about experience. So there is a person that's experienced something that I haven't, and it's kind of passing on that experience. In today's world, a lot of young men and women are looking for dads, and they can't find them. And that should not be in the house of God. So we need some experienced Christians to step up. Over the years, I've gathered groups of people, because a lot of discipleship happens within a group and sometimes one-on-one stuff. And right now, I'm beginning to gather 11 older men, fathers in the church. We will meet together on Tuesday. And because they're older, we can meet in the afternoon. And I hope the wealth that we have as a church is to have the kind of culture of parenting and reproduction. But oftentimes, whenever men and women get older, they kind of like don't see their value anymore. Right. The fact is, they are of supreme value in those moments. And there are loads of others that would like you to take an interest in them. And so I'm hoping to demonstrate to all of us old guys, not that I'm that old, but I'll be the oldest guy in the room, I bet. But
John, can I interrupt you just a second? I think sometimes young men don't actually know that they need older men. They're like, I just need a buddy to run with. So I think older men need to initiate, in a sense, that truth. Like, hey, I'd love to meet with you. I just see God's hand on your life, and I want to meet with you, and I want to call things out of you. Yes. And so I think sometimes the beauty of Confluence is we've got brothers and sisters in the house, but we have mothers and fathers in the house. And sometimes church movements only have one of those things. And so we've got to be bold enough to be in the older to say, like, hey, I see God on your life. I want to meet with you and talk to you.
Very good. So that's first, connection. And secondly, the God's plan of deploying people into the kingdom is this very thing that we're talking about here today. And it's like having biological kids. You raise them, you teach them. They learn more by being in the home than even the things you say. You model certain things. They take on that characteristic and values. But there comes a time when you got to say goodbye and let them go. Biological parents have to let the kids go. Well, the same is true in spiritual parenting. You don't want to create a dependence on you to where all of a sudden you're crowding in their lives all the time. You want to encourage them to do what you have done. When I first started out in ministry, we started our first church when I was 21, and I knew even less than Donnie Griggs knew. And my wife will remember me pleading, I wish I had a father. I wish I had someone who could speak into my life, help me. And I just kind of felt I was out there all alone and vulnerable. And back in those early days, I said to Linda, if I ever have an opportunity to parent and pour my life into young people, that's what I want to do. Because I know what it's like to be absent of that. Everyone needs a father and mother. And in many cases, they need a spiritual grandparent. We are biological grandparents. And what is lovely for me to see is the relationship that we have with our grandkids. They actually love being around us. They think we're so much fun. And we do have a few toys that they enjoy too, like get out on the lake in a boat or something, but we need, because we're a family, spiritual uncles and grandparents, and that's the way the church ought to live. I remember also, if you're going to engage sons and daughters, You need to bring them into your context so they can see how you live. I remember when Dylan Neely was 18, bringing him to my house. I need a guy. He's a big, strong kid. And I said, I need someone to help me do some mulch, which meant I'd like for you to spread the mulch. But I'm out there with him pretending to spread mulch. And I fed him real good, 5, 6, 7 dozen hamburgers. So But in that context of just normal life, the way we were living in our home, he's asking me questions. How do you stay married? How do you do this? And there's that interaction that naturally takes place. It's not artificial if you try to set up a system. It's a natural relationship. When Brian Mallory first came into the church and we began to see leadership in him, I asked him to go with me on a trip out to Oregon where I would be working into a church, just a ride along. And on the way back in the airplane, I asked, what'd you think? You know what he said? Fairly boldly, actually. He says, this is what I think. I want to do what you do. Now see, he being exposed, just being in an environment with me, stimulated something in him. He's kind of doing but he's doing it better, which is a real joy for me. Spiritual fathering and mothering means you're willing to give them responsibility and understand that if they fail in the responsibility, that is a marvelous opportunity. It's a teaching opportunity. That's what Jesus did. Why couldn't we cast them out? Which led to an interaction of training. So the failure became a positive, becomes a learning experience. So watching them teach and lead, seeing them do things that you've done, it's a thrill. I have coined certain phrases that if you've been around me a long time, you kind of know which one of them. A simple, stupid phrase, really, but but I mean it sincerely. It means something to me. I'm a nickel in God's pocket, and he can spin me however he wants to. Dylan Neely was telling me the other day that one of the guys he is fathering and parenting said to him, because he's heard Dylan say it, he said, Dylan, I'm a nickel in God's pocket and a penny in yours. I mean, it's a pleasure when you begin to see these things have taken hold and moving through the generations, that you have an impact well beyond your years. I got to hurry on here because this is the important person to hear here. But spiritual parenting involves affirmation. Affirming is so very, very important. And when you affirm, you develop a bond with someone that which they're very happy to receive. And it lifts them from where they may view themselves. We do not have an accurate view of ourselves. When someone tells us or affirms us, that changes even our view of ourselves. I'll give you an example. This is a note. I just want you to see how this works. To me, it says, John, just wanted to say, it's a handwritten note, so it's beautiful. I just wanted to say thank you for your encouragement over the years and for believing in me. As we were texting to organize the meeting next week, you could have just ended the conversation, but you took time to say, I'm proud of you. Simple words, but powerful words. Every conversation we have influences the person we're conversing with. And he says, every conversation we have influences the way I lead and has shaped me greatly over the years. I love my biological father, but you've truly been a father to me, modeling a life of passion, not passivity, and I will always be grateful. Now, how precious is that? That's the joy of you taking the time to invest and affirm others. And watching this young man grow and develop in his gifting has been one of the most fulfilling things. Watching this others do and do better, actually, than you. Unless you wonder, that wasn't from Brian Mallory. Sounds a lot like him, doesn't it? Well, But once you benefit from spiritual parenting relationship, that person that's benefited feels the responsibility to do the same thing. And that's how you create a culture of parenting in your church. I do think that is transpiring in our church because we are watching people we parent do the same thing. And it's moving on through the generations now. It's creating a culture. You want to create that culture. Yes. That means you really have to initiate and go for it. One last note. This is again to both Linda and I. And it's humbling to receive notes like this, but I know they're sincere. There are no words to adequately express the appreciation we feel for the faith and sacrifices you made to plant and establish the atmosphere we enjoy at Jubilee Church and all of our churches. You mean so much to us. We love you so much. Brian and Rachel. So, reproducing creates a joy, it creates a culture, it creates a family. Do it.
This is tricky, holding this and,
Well,
and this.
I'll do it for you. I'll hold the mic for you.
Ooh, wow, I like that. My knight in shining armor. First of all, disclaimer, in case I raise this arm and you notice the stains, I just want you to know it's not to be a distraction. If you've had a hamburger that ran down your sleeve, you understand. Okay, my most constant goal is to teach my natural and spiritual children to know God for themselves and to need Him with all their heart.
You want me to do it? Sure. Yeah.
Wow. My other knight in shining armor. Thank you, Sophie. She didn't hear me. I've been privileged to parent 2 natural children, and they're beautiful young ladies, and I'm so proud of them. But I've been privileged to parent many spiritual children, and many of them are younger, but there are some that have been older and even my age, which is to say that it's not up to,
Yeah, what you need to do is...
I'm going to lose my notes here, so it's going to go into pretty natural here. Okay, God calls us to a path that He's designed for us. He has your path all written out for you. He's made plans for you to walk in, and this is part of it. Women are naturally mothers. Whether they're natural mothers or not, they're mothers. They mother wherever they go. Fathers are natural fathers. They take authority. They exert their authority in places that it needs to be exerted. It's a natural path of life that God has determined for us. So when we started the church in St. Louis, God sent us about a big group of 20-year-olds. It was totally His design. I won't go into the details. I felt God wanted me to gather the girls and just talk to them about biblical life principles. So I did that for some time, for about a year, because I was traveling so much I wasn't able to mentor all of them one-on-one for sure. So this was the way God wanted me to do it. Eventually I felt God directed me to several young ladies, and in particular to spend time to invest my life in theirs. Rachel Mowry was one of them I felt drawn to. I had an inkling God had put in my heart that He had plans for her that were pretty big, but she didn't know it. She wasn't even dating Brian at the time, but she became Brian's wife. And I felt like God wanted me to invest in her things that I had learned from my walk with Him. I'm having so much help here.
Well, there's a button that you can push that doesn't move. I don't know.
Okay, what is it? I'd like to know
I
that.
thought it was there, wasn't it?
I think you're fine.
Okay. Hi. And then later on, I felt, too, one of these people were Abby Nadolny. And maybe you haven't met Abby. She's a powerful young lady, not only in the business world, but in the church. She's a leader in our church. She's an amazing young lady, can be quite intimidating to me because she is so amazing. But I felt God wanted me to invest in her life, and she gave me full access to her life. When they first came to St. Louis, it was at this time that the 20s were coming into the church, and she had a church background, and Dan and her had just been married very shortly, and she was going through some really hard times at that time. But when she asked me, or I asked her, I don't remember how it started exactly, I should have asked her, to spend time with her, she opened her life completely to me, every part of it. And it's been such a joy developing that relationship with her and walking with her. She's put me to the test many times, but my main goal was always to point her back to God. And this was a message I received from her last week, and I'm reading it just simply to show you how this sets a culture in your church that she's carrying on. Hi, friend, how are you? I just met with a girl that reminded me of myself a lot. And I was just thinking about just us starting to meet 20 years ago, and me probably having so many of the same thoughts, questions, and responses and emotions, and I just thought, you have been so kind to lead me so well and have much patience with me, and I have invested so much, and you still do. It's not a past tense. You have deposited so much wisdom in my life, and I look back now, and the things I'm sharing, I just know that was Linda, or Linda prayed that. The legacy that you're leaving and have left will leave from the lives that you're impacting is abundant. I just feel so grateful. I get to be your friend, and I get to have been on the receiving end of the goodness of God in your life for these years. I love you so much. You have such an impact and influence on my life. It has forever changed the trajectory of my life, and I'm so grateful. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Letting God do the work. I couldn't change Abby. I can't change myself. I surely can't change Abby. God did it. Just keep directing them back to God and their dependency on God. Abby's now doing what I did with her. She's mentoring other young ladies, and she's investing in the church as a whole. That's the culture we want to set as a family. I have some goals that I want to share with you as I walk through the process of my life. I've learned through my mistakes much wisdom, because that's how I usually learn it, is through my mistakes. So I teach out of my mistakes mainly. Goal is not to build a dependent relationship. You are not the answer man. Because when I first thought of doing this, I thought I had to have the answers. No, God has the answers, so you point them to him. And teach them to love him and to love his word, because it's the lamp to their path. He is the lamp, and his word is truth. Second, teach them to love their husbands and children and to love others. If they're not married, that's a given. But things happen to everyone. We all have problems in our life. Bad things happen that change us. But this statement has carried me through my life. But it's our response that shapes us. And if you respond to God, he teaches you. And he teaches you mainly how to forgive continuously. And it has to be a continuous part of our life to keep our hearts clear. And he teaches us how to forgive. He says to pray for those who despitefully use you. Don't go to them. Don't say, oh, you've hurt me. Deal with it like God deals with us as we confess our sins, and unforgiveness is a sin, according to the word, as I see it. We confess it, he forgives us. And it's not up to the person you're forgiving to change. It's up to you to change, because you can't change them. But you can pray for them, because that changes your heart, and it also gives them the freedom for God to work in their lives. Third, don't take on offenses of others. That's so easy to do, isn't it? You hear a story of how they've been wronged, how this happened. There's 3 sides to every story. There's their side, the other side, and God's side, the truth. He has the truth. He is the way. So go to him for the truth, and don't take up their offense, and speak the truth to them in love. Okay, and keep pointing them back to hearing God. Fourth, don't promise secrecy until you've heard what they've had to say. How many times have they said, if I tell you this, you won't tell anybody, will you? Well, I've fallen into that trap, and it really trapped me, and it trapped that person, unfortunately, and it trapped the people that were in the story that she told me, because I wasn't allowed to open my mouth. Don't do it. See, I learned through my mistakes. What you do is you say, after I hear what you have to say, I'll let you know. But don't promise it ahead of time. I'm skipping. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hurry. I think it's the 4th one, I'm not sure. Don't take others' offense. Oh, don't promise secrecy. My thing flipped. Surprise, surprise. What's wonderful about being in other people's lives and my children's lives, and those I've mentored and mothered, they become my friends. Like Abby opens, she doesn't say, hi, Mom. She says, hi, friend. They become your friend, and they carry on your legacy. Wow. This scripture has always guided my life. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Someone once said, what you do for yourself dies with you. What you do for others lives on forever.
We might need your help, yeah. So we've got a few more minutes here. If you want to, we're going to open up for some Q&A. So for the sake of recording, we want you to ask your question into the microphone. So don't just yell it out. Willie's got good running shoes on right now, so he's coming your way.
Ready.
So just raise your hand if you have a question.
So at Rock Church we have a program called the Covenant. At Rock Church we have a program called the Covenant House. Drug addicts and stuff like that come in, and my question is a lot of these guys are trying to learn how to be a parent. How can we help guide them to do that as well? Kind of what you guys are asking.
So do they have biological kids, you mean, or just like? Yeah. To like biologically go back and parent their kids after years of addiction? As they're just starting to recover, the mothers, generally we work with the guys, but as the mothers allow their children to see their fathers, they don't really know what to do with them. So I'm just wondering if you guys have any advice as far as how we can help foster those fathers and mothers into being the father and mother for their children when they never had the example. Yeah. I mean, I'll let others speak to this. I think when we first had biological kids, we didn't know what we were doing, and we were desperate for like books and podcasts. And did they have podcasts back then? Tape cassette series and we were just desperate to like give us something. But honestly, I think, and you can correct me, I think more is caught than taught in the parenting world. And so you reflect your parents naturally, and that can be really bad, or it can be really beautiful. But again, I think the spiritual parenting has the power to switch that over. And so I would say I would get some of your good parents in the church, around them and literally model for them what parenting looks like. Come alongside them, because I think seminars and books and all that, they're helpful for sure. But like, you see somebody interact with their kid when they make a big mess, and you're like, oh, I would have flipped out. And you see their patience, but you see like, hey, like, you need to clean this. Like, so you just start to see more of it modeled, which I think is important.
Yeah, so John and Linda, you guys were talking about how Bo and Alexis were underneath your guys' care. I just wanted to ask what characteristics you saw in them as young people that you really felt like would prepare them for what they're in now.
Well, we're out of time. Thanks for coming.
Characteristics you saw in them that causes you to know.
Well, that's a miracle. I mean, part of it was prophetic. The first time, I believe, I met Bo, he was at UNH, New Hampshire University, and you were in that old frat house in the basement. And well,
It was an old frat house that had become a Christian men's living house.
yeah.
And I was in the basement.
That didn't sound good, did it? No, it didn't. But I met you. I don't remember the words, but I spoke something to you in that moment. I just met him. Do you remember what it was?
I mean, essentially what John just said was, he kind of like put his finger in my chest and said, I see the leadership on you, and you could do something. You could lead a church. You could plant a church. And I just, I've never heard of any of those things. And so I didn't even know like what he was talking about.
But the result is like he rose to that because there was something of God in it.
Yes.
And so I think it's, whenever you're dealing with people, always be listening and asking God. Rather than using logic to figure, oh, that guy's got ability. That works too, you see that. But when I'm in a situation, I want to listen to Jesus and see if he's pointing out something, saying something. So I think the first characteristic was actually hearing God. But the other thing is, Bo was willing to receive counsel. He went off and did a year team with Ian Ashby, didn't you? And then I spoke to him when he was still in England and asked him if he would join our training program, Trilogy Project. He said yes. It helped that I said we'd pay for it. The point is, he followed through on fatherly guidance that affected the trajectory of your life. And then the last time we were in our house, and when you were finishing Trilogy, and I said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to plant a church, which is what I wanted him to say. And I said, well, the next plant I will want to do is in Tacoma, Washington. Parachute in. And we bought plane tickets, Linda and I, and we flew out. We spent a couple of days in Tacoma. I wanted you to see how you get acquainted with a town. The fact is, what I saw was a willingness to submit, receive fatherly counsel, move through, and be guided. And, I mean, you really stuck with it, dude. Did good. I don't know, is that helpful? Here, Linda's got it.
I think the most important thing is that they were so teachable. They wanted someone in their life helping them along. And I can remember Alexis asking so many questions. And I thought, this girl is going to be something, because she wants to know. She wants help. She's not self-sufficient. She's depending on God and on others to help her through life. And I think that's a goal that I hope everyone here would have, is to stay teachable all their lives.
We have a son that is a senior in high school, and so my question is, he is not actively seeking out that type of relationship. we would love that for him, but how do we encourage that, help him along with that without getting in the way or being too involved?
We had a senior in high school last year. This isn't going to be helpful to you at first, but hopefully we get there. There's a statistic about teenagers in the church. If they know 5 adults by name and 5 adults know them by name that are not their parents, they're exponentially more likely to stay in church after they graduate high school and keep going to church. And so it's incredibly important to that desire you have in you is a very important desire to have. And I think you try to find links, just like any kind of like friendship thing. You're like, well, who's into something they're into, and then they like can follow them or shadow them and then I think too, I wouldn't be at all opposed to just nudging someone and saying like, hey, would you mind coming alongside my son and just saying, hey man, I'd love to hang out with you, or I heard you're into this. I'd love to hear more about that, or like just elbowing people to come along them. I think again, I know we have 3 teenage boys right now, so I know what teenage boys are like. They're like, I want peer level, and they're like, why would I hang out with someone older, And that's a tough one to break into, but I think they do find the joy of like a hobby or something like if they work on cars or whatever it might be that they're like, hey, I want in on that too. I want to see what you're doing. I want to do what you're doing. And so I wouldn't be opposed to just like saying to somebody in the church you think would connect well with your son, just can you go tap him on the shoulder and give it a shot and just see how he responds to that. Anything like, yeah.
Anytime I had a desire to meet with someone, I would always ask my leadership, John, or when Brian came as leader, what do you think? Because they know those people better than I do. But I think back to this thing about modeling something, having people in your home of like interests that he would enjoy, that he would probably connect with. Just giving him that opportunity to be around him. I find that when I have people in my home, my grandchildren that are now living with us for a period of time, are very drawn to them. Virginia and Carl, they said, why don't we have them over? Why don't we have them over? And so these people are influencing my grandchildren. And they may not be doing it personally, but they are. But that will happen eventually.
I think, yeah. Sorry, man. My question is kind of similar, but it was more so, you mentioned there comes a point, obviously, when you're kids, you kind of have to let them go, right? And you kind of are so involved in their lives early on. The question is, do you guys have any advice or thoughts on how to transition maybe before you get to let them go because you're so involved in their lives? What kind of advice would you have on transitioning them to like more of an independence, like this is going to be something that you guys have to take seriously, your faith, and you guys kind of just mentioned that a little bit, but I don't know if you guys had any other thoughts as well.
While they're consulting, coming up with wisdom. Yeah, I think I had a moment of panic with my senior, like, oh, what else do I need to teach him? Like, and like stupid things like credit cards. Like, hey, do you know how credit works? But I think what Alexis was just saying to me too. I think you want to see if you can start to see them transition into adult life in the church. So like we're a church of community groups. So like what would it look like for seniors to join community groups? And it was always a joy for us to see our senior, like when he would get home from whatever, like just to sit in our living room when community group was happening and engage and just kind of like transition to be an adult in the church and leave the child stuff behind. And I do think, I just want to say this carefully, I think it's important that we do youth stuff in our churches, but I think they cannot be siloed from the church. So you have to be so careful not to silo off your youth ministry so that when they get out of youth ministry, they're like, I don't know what church is. I know what youth ministry is. And so you need that link to remain there as they transition out of it. So What were you guys consulting over? Anything good?
I was just telling him what he said.
Oh.
He didn't hear.
Oh, okay. You were repeating the question.
Slow talking into the mic.
Okay.
Otherwise, I don't get the question.
No.
So I was just curious, what was something that you each did with your kids that was like a spiritual discipleship thing in your home that was the most impactful for them growing up?
Yeah, I think it's Deuteronomy 6, where the command to communicate the law came with like at the dinner table and on walks and, you know, as you go. And so we did do Tim and Mary Chambers have a hilarious story of being at our house with our kids doing a before school Bible study that just went completely sideways. So we did do that stuff, but I think Alexis is unbelievable at as you go. Like she's having conversations with my sons in the car. She has incredible patience. Like they get chatty at 11 o'clock at night and you're like, nope, no, you had 13 hours to get your questions in. And she won't miss that opportunity. Yeah, I mean, I'm in bed snoring, but she's hitting that opportunity. And so I think you like to apply the gospel, like when they come home from school or a situation and say like, this happened, like apply the gospel to that. Yeah. Not just good ideas about how to fix that, but like, how does the gospel, so like our kids, for the most part, have been in public school in Tacoma. So there's a huge like LGBTQ plus agenda. And so we're like applying the gospel to these things about how do you love people, you know, how do you even like encourage people, like all these things that come up with real life as you go at the dinner table, on your walks, you know, road trips kind of thing. So I think that's been the most powerful and effective for our kids is the on the go stuff, not necessarily like the sit down, open your Bible. We've tried that. It's been okay. But
I feel like we tried to create a family identity as well. And so I would remember you talking to the boys and saying like, Noonan boys do these things, you know? And so we created like, oh, I'm a part of this family. I'm a Noonan kid. Noonan kids look and do these kinds of things. And I think that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like that with, I was taught in a Christian home that you should read a Bible story every night and pray with your kids, and that will be all that you need to do. But it really is an ongoing walk, isn't it, Steph? It's just like, it's taking opportunities that you're there and they're going to ask, or they're going to say something and you're going to be able to address it.
I think you as a parent have a unique power to bless your children. And so like when I put my kids to bed at night, even like my 16-year-old now, he's like 6'1", he's like 180 pounds. Like I'll get on his bed and like push down on him blessing. You know, like physically I want you to remember this blessing. So I'm going to shake you, like shake the blessing into you. And like, because our kids have done a lot of sports, and at the end of the year, they always do these sports banquets at the end, and they give out trophies to everybody who played. And like, you can tell, like, there's kids who get trophies, and the coach will be like, this is Billy, they did a great job this year, they hustled, and the kid's so uncomfortable. And it's so sad, because you know this kid's getting zero affirmation at home. They're so uncomfortable with affirmation. And you just want your kid to be like, because it's a gospel thing, I want to receive the love of the Father in a way that my Father has affirmed in me, imperfectly. And so, like, I mean, that's another thing is I shake the heck out of them and bless them so that, like, they're using all their senses there with blessing.
Probably one of the most impacting things you can do for your kids is they will watch how you handle various situations. Painful, struggles, different things. The way you model how you handle those situations become the impacting influences in their life.
Yeah, I was just curious how to spiritually parent younger kids, and their biological parents may not have the full vision of the church, and honoring their parents, but also challenging them.
That's a good question. I think we should always be looking for someone to encourage or strengthen or to bless in the Lord somehow. And even as we traveled from place to place, even across the nations, I have kids across the nations that would say I've said certain things to them because that was what God said to them. Just being alert to what God wants to say to that kid. Maybe they want you. It's just very simple. I had one lady come to me years later. She says, "Remember when you came up to me at church and said, 'I'm so proud of you, how you're following after God'?" And she had just gone through a rough patch. And she said, "That changed my life." Just saying what God puts in your heart to say to people, looking for the opportunities. Always. And as young people, doing it to the younger people and to those your age. Or even, I can remember my grandmother saying, "Don't ever pass up an old person without speaking to him." And that I understand now. Because you make their day when you just say, "Hi, how are you doing?" Or "It's so good to see you," or "You look lovely today." Whatever comes to your heart, encourage, strengthen, always be there to have a good word for someone when God puts it in your heart.
My immediate thought was that you bless those parents. You know, that you're not trying to like usurp the place of his parents, but God has given you a place in this young person's life to love them and show them something different, like the ways of the Lord. And I think that it's known between you and that young person that we like love them. They're doing what they know to do, you know? And so I just think it's like a love covers a multitude of things. And so that would be my.
On a separate note, not answering a question, just something that I was thinking of is in one of the things I see in parenting across the board, not just in the church, is a lack of courage to parent in this generation. And I think that's maybe reactive to whatever they experienced as kids. And I think it's the same in spiritual parenting, is that sometimes there's a lack of courage to call people to something greater and bigger and to walk in righteousness. And I think partly because we have this whole church hurt thing that's happened, and that's real, and I'm not downplaying that at all, but I think sometimes we're reactive in that, like, well, I felt controlled or manipulated in my old church, or, you know, like language that happens. And I think because we're a movement of grace and truth, that we need to model Jesus in that said he was full of grace and full of truth. So he didn't take turns at grace and take turns at truth. And I think as we do that, we should have confidence to address things in young people or people that you're spiritually parenting, to call them to something bigger and better. And you know, like the whole pearls before swine thing, like you pull that hand back before the pig bites you. That's what that's about, by the way. So like when people get ready to bite, you just pull it back and it's like, okay, it's all right. It's all right. I'm not going to control your life. But you're offering something and you're calling, and I think we heard that today in the messages we heard this morning and the prophetic words, to be courageous in that, because life and death is on the line, not because of like better church attendance is on the line or another volunteer at the church is on the line, but because life and death is on the line, that we should be courageous to call people out of sin and into righteousness. The Canadians in the back.
So I'm finding the predominant culture of people coming to the church is that of finding Christian leadership to be a destructive thing rather than a positive thing. So how do you create a culture of healthy mothering and fathering in the church when this is people's experience of what mothering and fathering has been?
I just think you should be able to have real conversations. I think you should be able to point out that it's like, it feels like when we're having these conversations, you seem to think that authority is heavy or destructive, or I think we need to have brave conversations with one another and point to what is true. And I think scriptures are true, and so I think like if you can share that, and I think we just need to be able to talk to one another really, and to understand the hurt that people come with, but to also say, you don't have to carry that anymore. Or you don't have to allow this to dictate how you see God the Father anymore. You had a really terrible father, pastor, but the answer to good pastoring is not no pastoring, And so I just feel like we need to just engage well with people and have good conversations. I don't think there's like a silver bullet, but I just think, man, so many times it's just like, can we have a conversation? I mean, a lot of times when our boys are reacting badly to things we're saying, you're like, I'm not trying to poke a stick in your eye. I'm trying to help you. Like, I'm trying to help you. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but I just think like we need to be better at having the conversations that need to be had with love and honesty.
Yeah.
When I'm meeting with people that are very wounded, which many have been, and aren't real receptive to directing, I should say, or just not even into asking questions, I would just pray before I met with that person and ask God, what would you like to say to him? And when he says it, it goes to the heart, And that's really important, that we always are dependent ourselves on God. That's modeling to the people that are following us, that they can be dependent upon God also. And to our children, our own children. If we are in fear and we are living out of God's bounds, that speaks volumes to them. Or if we are following God and we're not afraid, even when disaster comes to the home, we're modeling something. We'll see what God does. Let's just see what God does. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, could you guys speak a little bit to what it felt like perhaps to transition from being a older brother, older sister voice to being a fathering and mothering voice, and maybe some things to be aware of when you're fathering or mothering someone similar in age to you?
I don't think age is the crucial issue. I think it's experience that becomes the issue.
We make it an issue, though.
Yeah, we can make age an issue, but it's not the predominant factor. If you have experience in a certain situation and the other person doesn't, then of course you can be quite helpful, even as an older brother. I mean, I had a father. His name was Bob. I was in my 40s and 50s. Just, you needed, yeah, I did. And he was a guy that I trusted, and he could say anything to me and give me advice. Now, he was not only older, he had experience in areas that I didn't have. And he created a safe environment for us to interact together. So I think that's more important even than age. Now, it may not be quite the question you're asking. You're asking the transition from an elder brother to a father? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the thing that comes to mind is I remember feeling surprised by the transition, like feeling surprised by the moment where someone had asked me a question where they wanted a fatherly response to it, and I was like, me? Like I thought we were just buddies, And I think we can discount ourselves or discount the authority that's been given to us to speak into people's lives. I mean, you're in Atlanta where you have an actual role in the church that people are like, they expect you to be pastoral, whatever filter they're using for that, but they're expecting. And I remember when someone was like, hey, well, no, you're like a pastor. You should feel free to speak into that. And I was like, really? And so I think it was surprising, but I think it's probably sooner than you think it is. I think, you've been a young leader in the church, and you probably already have that role in people's lives, whether you recognize it or not. And I think people are probably expecting more fatherly out of you than not. And it's hard because you go from being buddies or friends or your wife's friends or whatever they might be, and you're like all of a sudden like coming into that role. But I think you have confidence in the calling on your life, that God called me to this, and if he called me to it, he'll provide, he'll give me everything I need for it. But all I can really say about it was surprising. It felt weird because I was 28 when we planted in Tacoma. And so I was like, I'm just everybody's buddy. We're just 20, we're just kids having kids,
I think some of it was happening simultaneously. I think I'm a sister to some and a mother to others, and I think I've learned from some, like Wes and Milena had their third child while we were having our first child. And I learned so much from my peer and my sister about what it was to love my children and bring them along, and that children were a joy and not a burden, all of that. And then, I'm almost 50 now, and I feel like I've finally, I'm embodying the heart that God has given me as a mother now, and it feels really natural, the shift that's occurred. I don't know that there was a big jump. It just sort of started to happen, and then I think that God sort of affirms those things in you.
Yeah. Alexis had mentioned to me earlier, whispered over the Titus 2 example of older women teach younger women, older men, and I think those are commands. As you read them, they're not like, hey, here's something that could help. They're commands in the church. And you almost neglect that or are disobedient to that command, because of insecurity. But actually, there's a call on your life to teach younger men to be self-controlled. If you've read that, there's only one command for the younger men. Don't worry about all the other stuff, guys. Just be self-controlled. Yeah. And I think there's a command. It's not just a suggestion to have a happy church. We need to step into obedience there.
One more? Rápido? Quick? Rápido. Okay, last one.
How do you help people who maybe are looking to you, but they're not within your obvious... Oh, sorry. How do you help people who obviously need parenting and are looking to you but are not necessarily within your sphere, or someone that God's directing to you to? Have you ever redirected anyone, or how do you help someone who needs help but maybe it's not from you?
So, sorry, just to make sure I understand it. So somebody's looking for help and they're asking you for help, but you're not the person who can help them. Is that what you're saying? So one of the things Alexis and I say, if a couple says, hey, can we meet with you? We've got a little something going on in the marriage, or someone's got something going on in their personal life. One of the things we always say to them is hey, we're like EMTs. So we can show up on the scene, assess the situation and be like, oh, you're fine. You just need a Band-Aid and some Neosporin. Or we might say you need brain surgery, and we're not brain surgeons. So we would be willing to say we're going to walk with you. We're not abandoning you. That needs to be clear to the person, but you need to go see professional or somebody who has that equipping on their life to be able to do that. And I think one of the things is it is so important to say, I'm not abandoning you here. I'm going with you in this process, but I'm not actually equipped to help you in your situation.
Through the years, I've had women come to me even from other churches and ask me if I would be like a mother to them. And of course, you can't very well do that because, for one thing, a mother's usually on the ground with you. But even in the church, women would ask if they could have time with me. And I would ask, I say, let me pray about it, and I'd ask God about it. And if God said no, not to invest your time here, or John or my leader says no, not to invest your time here, I say, okay, God, who should I send her to? And I would find someone in the church that God had pointed out to me, and I'd say, would you be willing, I'd go to them first, would you be willing to just talk to this lady and see what you think, see if that's God? And then if she does that, then the woman has someone she can talk to. And we all need somebody. And it's not always professional that we need. We just need love sometimes, and someone to listen to us and to point us to the truth.